Spell live after another live show, and it's a little trickier than it looks. So here we are. Um, as you know, the auction is going on and everything else. So we're going to be talking to Don at 10:30, unless something 10:30 about what is happening in his life and his things, because he's off to the side answering, as you know, varied email. If you want to know what's happening with Don, check out his Facebook page at which is at Don Lewis, Donald Lewis. Just right there on Facebook, really live and actually on that. So we're really excited. But today we're going to answer hopefully a question called. We're going to answer some questions, but really one more piece of that. As you know, a week from tonight will be the start of the Paladin Telethon. So we're going to be very excited about that opportunity coming on the air. There's going to be Witch Rising this week, and at 10:30 we will be talking to Don Lewis. But we are going to start with talking about a question that was brought up on Monday's Daily Spell Call about the Oracle. And so here we go. We're going to first talk about, and that was about remote viewing. And on Monday, I announced, on Tuesday, I announced that we had gotten somebody who's pretty good about it. Actually, really knowledgeable. The CIA. It's a mind blowing story. So at 10:30, we're going to present to Don. Right now, we're going to bring on David Moore, and so he's going to be telling us all about the things about the idea of remote viewing. Hi, Lori. About remote viewing and how it works and some of the places that it plays to. Um, and really, so all I know about really remote viewing, I know a bit, but really what it comes down to is the idea that you sit in one place. At least the prototype is you sit in one place and you see another. That's clairvoyance, clairaudience, but also that remote viewing, you can see places you haven't been before. But it's a kind of an interesting idea. But David can give us a better explanation. So I'm going to hand it over to David.
Hi. I wish we could find somebody fun like a CIA operative to join us for this. Here's the exciting thing that I found when I was researching the topic a long time ago, and I retouched recently to get ready for this show. There are actually multiple government agencies that have done experimentation for decades on this topic that they call remote viewing. So it's more than a generic definition of seeing some place you haven't been before. It's excitingly the term that was coined for a specific process that various government agencies have been studying in great depth and in a lot of different ways. The thing about scientific exploration of any topic is you want to tweak it and try again. Change some little detail and try again. Select a different topic and try again. And what they've done, they've used three people typically in their experiments. And in this report that I read that was done by the CIA, even though their official stance was that, well, it wasn't accurate enough to be something put into great use by government agencies, they did express the desire to take over and continue the experimentation, which tells me quite a bit about how many hits versus misses they must have had with these experiments. But here's how it works. One person is the viewer. That's the given. That's what everybody's imagining to begin with. Someone is closing their eyes or without looking at any aids, seeing someplace they've never been. But the exciting thing with these experiments is they involved three people. One person was the sender, or sometimes called the beacon. And the beacon person would go to some place that they weren't familiar with and have a way to communicate that to the third person, which is the judge. The judge would sit, preferably as impartial and as critical minded a judge as they could find, would sit and observe carefully the viewer, and also would have information coming in real time, live information coming in about all the details of where the beacon was located. And the viewer would give as many details as possible about that beacon, and the judge would declare it was either a hit because it was accurate enough to meet the various marks they looked for, or a miss. Obviously, they had a lot of hits because not only did they not say, oh, this is of no value whatsoever, but the CIA wanted to take it over. Now, to give specific dates, various agencies.
Let me hold you there. I think one thing that would be a really fun game. I mean, besides the government energy, but that would be a really fun game to play. Okay, And so once you continue on, I think it's interesting. So this talk of, because I always hear about the idea that the government's involved. So let me go ahead and let you continue.
Well, one exciting thing about this well publicized report, it was released in 2002, but it was actually prepared by an agency hired by the CIA in 1995. And according to this report, various agencies have been doing these specific types of experimentation that we talked about. One for places, like I described, two for intelligence information gathering. And they found sometimes it was just a little too vague. They wanted very specific things and they didn't always get every specific thing they were looking for. But still, they continued to do it because it was enough to keep them hooked. And they tried other things like gathering information on people that didn't have to do with a real time location and didn't have to do with specific intelligence report type information. They wanted to see if they could remote view and actually, say, follow a terrorist around and know their location at any given point, things like that. So apparently, it drew enough interest that this 1995 report, released to the public in 2002, says the CIA wanted to take it over. What does that tell you about the time and money they're willing to pour even further into this project? Isn't that exciting?
Exciting. I mean, anytime people bring up CIA, it's not a comfortable situation. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, a lot of these stories. So a lot of these stories, these tellings, and these sort of lookups, it doesn't seem to make a difference in people's lives. I mean, so it's always like, so it's something that titillates, but how does it affect people? I mean, how does it? Why is this important to people, especially people who practice psychism? I mean, how is it important? I mean, in that bolder way. I know it is, but
I would love to illustrate a point that kind of counters what you just said a little bit from my
yeah,
viewpoint. I, one of the things that is now public information that we know that time and money was poured into and was a CIA related effort and perpetrated on the American public as well as abroad was that you can look it up. They actually consciously tried to promote the idea to the public that anyone who claims that they were aware of or they were seeing patterns that could be considered conspiracy was an absolute nutcase and probably had tinfoil on their head, cowering in their home, hiding from aliens. This idea of that person having to be a total fruit basket and not having their faculties about them was more and more and more ingrained in the public until now. That is exactly what most of the public think when someone claims they think there's a conspiracy among certain individuals in government to perpetrate some sort of immoral or criminal activity. When in fact, before that program perpetrated on the public by the CIA, before that program, people didn't automatically jump to such a conclusion. They tended to listen with interest and say, "Oh, really? What makes you think so?" And they were comfortable with the topic. So there have been things that have strongly affected the public that have been direct results of programs from agencies such as the CIA in the past. I would say that makes it something to at least be considering and not automatically offhandedly dismiss. Something to consider if they feel like it's worth pouring time and money into a program like this. They've got to be getting results. Ever since the 1970s, they have to have been getting a lot of hits from those judges to bother to go forward. I find that exciting because we can just ignore the fact that they're doing that research and think about our own lives and ourselves and our own practices. That means that if we follow a system like that or use the guidelines that they set up for this system and other psychic related practices that we're working on developing, we can find confirmation. And that's important, isn't it? We can confirm the results.
I agree. So one of the things I talk about a lot, just no matter what it is, from the idea of magic, spells, fairies, ghosts, right, to these types of things, psychism as a whole, ESP, psychism, and all of those things have had a long history with the government and practicing, but also labs. Like we have Duke University did labs for years, and plus our own thing. So we do see this scientific body of it. The TED Talk, I forget the name of it. It was banned because of the idea of morphic fields and it was just too scientific for them. It won over too much, and this energy was then discredited by removing it. So we do see information getting discredited all the time. I mean, I'm not arguing, and of course, even now we see this idea of discrediting even known facts. So
Yes. And there are misinformation campaigns, and it's no longer some kind of a crazy conspiracy theory to say that. We have a lot of evidence that shows clearly that certain news agencies have purposefully carried out misinformation campaigns in order to push their agendas. Wouldn't it just be naive to think that's never happened before, from and no organization before has ever tried to do such a thing in order to further their own agenda? So, what can we do that's positive
mhm.
when considering these things? One of the things we can do is spread real information, spread accurate information. And do you realize the effect that it would have with all the social media and other ways we have to connect today? The effect we can have if we start doing scientifically sound research ourselves, if we start using controls that are put in place in programs like this remote viewing program in order to monitor and measure effectively the results of our spell work or anything else that we do. Wouldn't that add credibility to our community as a whole in the eyes of the public and help us to take a lot of things that are beneficial to mankind that we practice and that we've learned about out into the mainstream?
I have done it. I actually I agree. I love doing that type of experimentation in shows. I've done a number of mass objects, mass research. All right, got that fixed. The research of such. I have the crystal web, which is a practice of that, which is a collective uh, egregore of sorts. I've been talking about that. So I'm a big believer that there are things in our universe, conscious in our universe, that is out there, and a way of knowing. So the idea of this idea of a sort of psychic GPS. But if I wanted to do something, let's say, go ahead. Let's take this next pieces, and then we can ask a question. What would happen? How would we do it for ourselves? I mean, okay, so we've talked about the government, but you said the practices are out there, and so what would we need to actually test this ourselves? Because that sounds like it would be a lot of fun.
Well, I think the best way, if I were going to do it, I'd first find somebody really critical who does not believe that these things will work and ask them to play the part of a judge. Because we would like to convince the mainstream that we have a legitimate system, but we need to demonstrate that we do have that legitimate system. The best way to do it is in the face of criticism. And that's, I think, how they selected judges for their programs. They wanted to pick people that were very scientific minded, matter of fact, and doubtful about the results of such experiments. That would be a great place to start. So there's our judge. Secondly, we should devise experiments that we can verify. We have a method to verify.
Hmm.
For instance, say you're going to do a little something and that's supposed to improve the health of someone that doctors think is not going to improve. Well, then they go to the doctor, they get an update, a checkup. You do the thing, they go back and get a checkup. There's a measurable result in the positive, and you say, aha, there's one example of a hit. We need to find ways to measure our success in what we're doing and critical people to watch and be aware and see the results. And then we can duplicate the kind of success these experiments have been having with the remote viewing programs.
Okay, and so you get this out there. It sounds pretty easy. Somebody said it was a great guest. Thank you. So Vivian, thank you. They called her a great guest, and people are finding it interesting. Um, and so yeah, continue watching at the bottom of the hour. But here's what I think it is interesting. So we've got all these people out there who keep claiming they've been part of these experiments, and we get these paperworks and everything else. But why aren't we seeing it being put in more practical use? Or are we just so far away from seeing it being more in like any of these skills, but remote viewing in a more practical way, so that we could use them?
Well, I think we do. I think we just don't always document it very well or include impartial observers, which is what I guess we're discussing this evening.
Hmm.
How many times has someone lost their keys and asked their friends in the community to help them find them, and two or three were spot on and it helped them find it. But did they document that to the satisfaction of a critic? No. We can set up experiments that would maybe satisfy a critic if we just have a certain percentage of success with those.
So, what you're talking about tonight is to begin that idea of the critical search. What you're saying is you're not questioning if it exists, or even a question if it exists wild for some people. It is about you making it into something usable, practical, efficient. Hmm?
Right.
Well, that's
And
interesting.
some of the exciting things are that when you conduct an experiment like that and you get hit, success, success, success under certain conditions, and other conditions not so much, it
Hmm.
teaches you what conditions are optimal to get the result. So we can sharpen our skills through experimentation, no doubt.
Hmm. And so, by doing these methods, we can create a course, we can create a system, we can create a training program, and I've seen those out on the internet. Some of the bigger dudes, but you said really three individuals had a lot to influence this. Can you talk about that?
Three people working together involve one person remotely creating the unique situation, one
Hmm.
person doing the viewing or gaining the information through psychic faculties, and one impartial or critical person observing the process and privy to both sides of the coin so that they can declare whether it's a success or not. We don't often involve that third person. We tend to, emotionally, we tend to avoid the critic. But by working with critics, we could really do ourselves a good service.
Well, that's an interesting concept. We hide from the critic, and and of course, we know the critic is always looking. So there's a belief that the critic is always looking for the no. That there's this inherent bias into the critic or the society that they're looking for the no. They're trying to disqualify it. If we're having the critic looking in there, not looking for the no's, but just to verify the yeses, it does change the dynamics of it a lot. So I do think that that mindset of them searching for no's or just verifying yeses is a big factor when you do these experiments. Um, that was a problem with a lot of the Duke University projects. A lot of them had a no attitude to begin with. The judges.
Sure, and I can understand from our viewpoint, we might think, somebody's going to rain on our parade with a bad attitude and affect our results. Well, then that gives us the unique opportunity to adjust our approach and be able to overcome the adversity of someone else's negative opinion, still getting what we're looking for out of the result. So I think maybe that's a good exercise in a way to have that, but also we can never claim that we are scientific in our approach unless we remember what science really is about. You hypothesize, you have some observations or some suspicions for some reason, and you hypothesize, which means you just propose that something could be. You devise experiments in order to see whether that thing is, but your experiments, this is very important, your experiments must be aimed at disproving the idea. That's the way science works. You come up with an idea and you try to disprove it. When you fail to do so, you try to be better at disproving it. The experiment should be increasingly aimed at disproving the idea. If you're not doing that, if you're trying to support an idea, that is unscientific thinking altogether. That is not the classic scientific method. So we can't really claim that we're using any scientific approach to developing our psychic faculties or to developing our approach to the mainstream with them if we don't use the scientific method and try to disprove that these things actually can and do happen. And I'm not afraid of that.
Not either, because one of the things I was doing at the NAB show, the National Association of Broadcasters, I see ghost hunters with their equipment and everything else, and I love that sort of thing. So I was like, when I made the show, and here's the one that caught everybody's attention: chasing the fae or hunting fae. That one rattled people because the strong concept of the fae and the idea that they're out there, but to start setting electronic equipment and other sort of scientific methods to begin analyzing them. I
I
mean,
love it.
and we do see a lot of analysis in, say, paranormal groups and ghost hunting. Isn't that? Can you explain how that fits in the scientific, not remote viewing, because that's a different thing, but the idea of scientific method being applied?
Well, sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't, because when it comes to television shows we have access to on those topics, they need
Mm-hmm.
ratings. So unfortunately, I've been privy to the inside of the
Mm-hmm.
processes with some of those shows, and I bet you have too. And the ones that I'm familiar with end up disappointing a lot of people. They get disillusioned because they realize these guys are making up results and falsifying results in order to
Sure.
get people excited. So you'd have to get away from the presented television series environment and talk with people that have small agencies and do this sort of thing out of the passion from their heart for the topic. People who are hired privately to help investigate these types of things, and paranormal investigators with real integrity and seriousness, that are trying to use scientific equipment to capture either evidence or disprove the idea that there's something paranormal happening. If you find the right people with the right mindset, then you can explore how you might be able to use some of that equipment or some of those techniques to your benefit. But if your model is somebody you saw on TV, you might not be going the right route.
That's fair enough. I mean, and we do enjoy this. I mean, in a lot of ways, we do have this sort of cosplay reality right now, so that I talk about it. Following it. But Bradley Fosterbear, one of our great listeners, says, "What a fantastic hit!" And he was talking about the idea of the scientific method and the idea of doing your own search. And Lori Blackman says, "Great conversation. I love to learn new ideas and approaches." All right, guys, we have about 5 minutes, so if you have any questions, feel. And then at the bottom of the hour, the man Rev Don Lewis will be here to talk about. We'll talk about that at the end because this is a fascinating subject. So, okay,
Well,
so go ahead.
mhm.
You gonna say something? You look like it.
I was going to fill in a little time if you'd allow me by quickly
Sure.
summarizing an actual experiment I did with a friend on telepathy.
That
Is
would
that
be
okay?
perfect. That would be perfect.
All right, cool. The two of us were best friends. We lived together and had two bunk beds basically in the same room, two different bunks, and we would talk in the dark. And one night we said, "Hey, I wonder if telepathy is real. I wonder if we can prove it to ourselves." We spent the next several hours, one of us imagining something, and the other one trying to see what that one was imagining and say what it was. Um, my perceptions were 100% accurate for the whole 3 or 4 hours we did it, and his were about 90% accurate for the whole time. We were shocked by the results, and we found during the experimentation that we got a much clearer idea transferred from one person to the other if it involved emotion and color. I remember specifically one time my friend Maurice said, "All right, I've got something," after we decided emotion and color were important. And immediately I saw it. From the Marvel series Captain America, I saw the villain, the Red Skull, clear as a bell in front of my face. And there was so much anger and hatred coming off of it. And I said, "Wow, the Red Skull." And he said, "Yes." And he almost fell out of his bed. We had so much fun with a simple little experiment like that, and we learned something. We learned that emotion and color help to make it a more, I guess, a stronger image and easier for someone to see, like a beacon for them.
I love those types of experiments, and I think that we should have more of them. And we're going to talk about that. Well, we're going to. So, yeah, we got 2 more minutes, and so I do have another question for you. And this one's important. For me, it's really kind of important. So, I'm a big fan of telepathy. We've talked about that. But one of the things is so we talked briefly. So, David's. Let me go ahead and fill you in. David's got a business show. We got his pilot sitting ready to be put out, and we're going to be looking for more guests for that show. But let's go ahead and take a few more minutes. I see Don's getting ready over in the distance. You're going to England. Let's go ahead and talk about that. You're leaving here, right? And you're going to be doing it,
Yes.
and part you're going to do filming for us and for yourself about that. But talk about your trip to England.
Well, sure. I'm going to go see some of my dear friends that I made connections with on a trip I took with Alexander Cabot 6 years ago, almost 7 years ago, I think. And I've kept in touch with, I guess 3 or 4 of them really closely. And that's all it's about. I'm on walkabout right now, visiting friends all over the United States, and also it'll be 2 weeks in England and 1 week in Scotland. But some of the exciting highlights are going to be that those friends I made just happen to be druids, musicians, priestesses, priests, people who have podcasts, people who travel around the country to various events, pagan events. And one of them is a master mason who was the master of the Grand Lodge of England at one point. That's fascinating to talk with him, and he's an amazing person. And also, I'm going to end up at Aaron Paramore's house, and he is, without argument, the world's foremost expert on the topic of Aleister Crowley. So I'm going to have fun. And while along the way, I'm going to take a lot of footage and I'm going to ask my friends to do interviews with me. And I'm going to share all of that content, 100% of it, with pagan.world for Pagan World TV. And you can do whatever you want with it with your editors and have fun.
There you go, and everything else. So we've been talking to David. He's on Facebook. How can people? What's the best way for if people want to connect with you and find out more about you?
It's easy
Pretty
to find me on facebook.com/KRODIN, Croden.
okay. I see. We're ready. You've got to explain that. How the heck did you get the name Crowded, or is that mean something?
Well, to be honest with you, I had a bag of runes and I pulled 9 runes out of the bag and they spelled They Croden. And Croden is actually an abbreviated thing. And those were supposed to represent the magical meanings of them, not the sounds were that important to me. They were my magical path, past, present, and future, 9 runes. And I took the first 3 that were already in my past off and just went with Croden, which was that present at that time and moving into the future.
There you go.
I That's weird, I know, but I pronounced my magical journey.
Oh, no, it's very much in what we talk about a lot about how things happen and synchronicity of divinations and all of that. So, hey, Don, how you doing?
Hey, Don.
Hello?
Yeah. So this is David. David, Don. I know you guys know each other. We've
Yes.
seen it before. Um, and you've been and I just want to mention David's been a great supporter of a lot of things we've done. He's been a great supporter in the sale of what we've been doing. I just wanted to.
Absolutely.
I know you wanted to thank him before we let him go on his evening, and we're going to get to our next announcement.
Thank you so much.
There you go. Well, thank you, David, and we're going to have more of David. I think in the future here, as you've heard, and they're all saying fantastic and love it. So, yay!
I
Yeah.
love you all too.
Well, that was exciting, and I'm so glad I got that. So we're going to talk a little bit today. So we're going to go from the very fun to very organized, and we thank everybody who's listening in and enjoying the show. And so tonight we're going to make a very simple thing. There's been a lot of confusion around what Don is doing, and I've heard a lot of different types of messages. Um, so hey, Don, how you doing? Uh,
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So I think I'm just going to go ahead and talk about this.
Hmm.
So sometimes I'm called on to do some things that are sometimes ruthless and even cruel in order to move the projects or things forward. And we ended up in having to make a very ruthless decision. And that is we have to get back to Danville. Now, there's a very specific reason. So, and there are 3 of them. And I want to give you the first one. And the third one is going to blow your socks off. It's much more personalized. But the first one is the way the United States, the reason why so whenever we ask who made the decision for Don to go back, ultimately, Don makes his own decisions in his life.
Hmm.
But he accepted my decision to begin this process now. Hmm? And the
Yes.
number one reason is we need to reestablish some residency in Illinois. And I've been looking up the medical records, and we want to have this have as smooth as possible to reestablish. But if he doesn't get his ID before his birthday on June 11th, it takes a whole year for some of these things to kick in. It's the concept of him being an Illinois resident by his 60th birthday, which is June 11th. So we need to get him there and transfer his ID from his Jacksonville ID to his state of Illinois before June or by June 11th, which means he has to have an apartment there. We have to get them here. Okay? Simple. It's not anything else. It is this simple idea that the government is ass, big ass, big farty ass. But if you sign up on June 12th, it can take up to a year for him to get various services. That if he put it on the day before on his birthday, they'll go, "Oh, you qualify for this year." Don't know why, but that is the law, and we've got to pay attention to the law. So we basically had to rip off. I had to rip off the band-aid and said we have to do this. We can't just pretend. We have to have an apartment. We can't just fly down there for a couple of days and bring it back. None of that works. Don't think of schemes. It's a simple process. And I'm the one who finally said we have to do this because as a responsible caretaker, I've got to make sure he stays within the government services. And Illinois is a better state medically and with Medicare and other things, so we need to reestablish them there. The second reason is the heat of summer is coming here in Florida, and Don relies on walking to be a large part of his exercise and other abilities. And with the heat coming in, it will be much harder for him to deal with that. And so I don't want him to have that problem either. And he doesn't either. I mean, so for his health and walking, that if he has that terrible heat that Florida's known for, we got about another month of good heat that he's going to be able to do his walking and get his energy up. But then we know what July is like here. We know what June is like here, and it's going to be hard for him to maintain his health and hide in sort of an in the idea of common electricity energy out there. Illinois is a little cooler. He can continue his walks. We're not saying it's perfect, but it is definitely that weather condition, the high humidity, all of it. It's heavy. Third, this one is critical to everybody in Florida. Let me make no thing. I've had this instinct. I've had this energy. I've been warning about it. But DeSantis and the Florida's government has passed a law. It's signed today, I understand, that allows them to discriminate medical services. We've been so grateful to everybody who have made donations to leave Don debt free, nearly debt free. He's got some debt, but compared to the horror stories that you hear about medical debt, Don doesn't have he has very much a blessing, and he will.
Absolutely.
And Don can talk a little bit about that. That you've been able to just the idea that you've had a blessing, that people have come forward.
No, people have been very kind to me. I have received many gifts to help me go forward. And yes,
Mm-hmm.
quite a bit of this could be so much worse if that were not the case.
Mm-hmm.
I've also received some institutional help, and so it's not that there's no debt at all, but it's very small compared to the thousands and thousands of dollars it could have been. But going forward, Illinois is a much more favorable state for healthcare, and with that new law, and I don't think you mentioned the exact character of the law,
Why don't you
but
do
it
that for
allows
me?
discrimination based on not only religious ideas, but moral and philosophical ideas, which is very broad. I'm a person who, you Google my name, you find me. I addressed the Jacksonville City Council on video on the subject of the Human Rights Ordinance um, as, um, as a strong supporter of it, which puts me in the same category as Disney at the moment, which is fighting with Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've not experienced any problems so far, but this law was not there until today. And who knows what could come. So there are a lot of reasons why Illinois is preferable at this moment.
And so we made the decision. I made the decision. He has a medical appointment in that first week of June. So as soon as that medical appointment's over, they're going to have a party for him in Jacksonville. Yay, yay, yay! And he's going to be back into Danville, in his new
Mhm.
apartment, getting his new ID. That is essential. If there's no other reason to do this, it is because of that purpose.
Yes.
And Don's doing this of his court. There's no because of all these problems here in Florida emerging. Well, it's been a great state. It's expensive, but most importantly, we can't take the chance of a doctor deciding that Don is not, is so untouchable that he doesn't get his medical attention. And I would hate to see that to happen to anybody here in Florida.
And this is a huge issue for people, particularly of certain minorities in Florida.
Hmm.
The LGBT Q community, the pagan community, I would say. Anything really that's out of the conservative Christian
Hmm.
camp is potentially going to be discriminated against because it's completely legal at this moment.
And so we can't leave Don medically vulnerable. We want to basically make sure that he's not vulnerable to this um, at any time because it would happen at the worst time. So this is another reason to go back to Danville. So we made the decision to it, and so now as we were making this decision, I had to make a cruel decision, and we're in the middle of what is essentially a cruel decision, but a necessary one. Don has a substantial amount of stuff. He does. And I guess as we're going forward in the spirit, he's going to be moving into a new lifestyle. People have been talking about that painting, Don. I've been told that you should be charging 2,500. I've heard first 1,000. And
Mhm.
Dave was the first one to say, "Oh, 12.99 sounds more correct." He talked about the psychological factor,
It's a
uh,
remarkable piece.
and then everybody's talking about more than that. Now I've heard somebody $2,500 on it, but
Hmm.
they know you have to finish it, so you need to finish this thing. Uh, it is a
Yeah.
remarkable piece, so I thought that was very interesting. But the real problem is that this stuff is all being saved for the idea of a great tradition, and that would be passed down in some sort of inheritance or some other method.
Hmm.
But would cost. I checked it. It cost $2,000 more or less to move it, plus the money that we need to actually make this move. Hmm? Yeah. Here, Lori's saying Jim's
I
saying
was
a
just
lifetime.
reading that.
Let's everybody read that, huh?
So many people have been talking about that piece. I cannot wait to see it done.
Hmm. And he's talking about a lifetime of memories. But the deepest regret is that, in truth, Don is talking about, and let's talk about lightening your load. But I made the cruel decision that we can't take a U-Haul back, and I'm very grateful Don is. So we're reducing everything that we can, because we can get this to the tradition. I'll talk about my beliefs to met people and individuals to be able to afford to be able to do so and get down into a smaller place and save a ton of money. If this is downsizing, and more importantly, it's passing on as Jim Sayers a lifetime of memories. I'm gonna let you talk
Mhm.
about this for a minute, Don.
I can talk about this. I talked about this afternoon on Midday with Reverend Don. I became first priest of the Correllian tradition when I was 15 years old. Um, I was not the child of my parents' youth, and I was put in the position of being the heir to a great deal of heritage, including a lot of stuff. And for 44 years, I've carried that stuff on the premise that it would be passed down to future generations. When the time came for that to happen, it's not quite what happened, but I think that's because Spirit maybe didn't want it to happen that way. In my mind, what's happening now is that this heritage is being passed down to the next generation, just not in a single piece. I'm watching lots of our Correllian clergy stepping forward to buy pieces, which is being very kind to support me, but it's also giving them a physical piece of the Correllian heritage. And um, I really feel that in a lot of ways is what the ancestors have basically asked for, what needs to happen. So I'm not entirely looking at it in the sense of, oh, horror, I'm dispersing these things that I was the guardian of for so long, but rather I'm sharing them with our Correllian family, um, with with people who otherwise would not necessarily have had a chance to have any piece of these collections. And that makes it a whole different way of looking at it, a far more positive way of looking at it. Now, that doesn't mean it's not a bittersweet moment for me, but I have to say, today I put up 10 pieces of my mother's jewelry. There'll be a number more pieces coming tomorrow. Of those 10, 9 have already gone. And they've gone to people that mostly people that I know, people that I care about, people who are an important part of our Corellian family. And um, while I'm not in a position to simply gift these items, I am delighted to see that they are going out into the tradition itself to people who care about them and will, in fact, preserve them for future generations, just not in one piece. What, in my mind, is happening with these collections is that they're going from a centralized location to a decentralized location. But their energy is going forward with them. I mean, everybody who gets a piece of the library is getting my energy, often Lady Crystal's energy, Sir Edward's energy. Everyone who's getting a piece of my mother's jewelry is getting her energy, sometimes my grandmother's energy. Um, and in my mind, it's going to strengthen our bonds. And will I miss these things? Well, some of them. I also have to say, I've been carrying that heritage throughout my entire adult life, and there is something to be said um, for being unencumbered by it. Um, in a lot of ways, this will be, although I'm still one of the first priesthood of the tradition, I'm certainly still going to be teaching and writing and working with ritual and so forth. Um, but at the same time, in a lot of ways, I'm going to be able to have much more of a private life than previously. And in my mind, this is just part of that. And I didn't necessarily expect to feel this way. Um, but actually, I do feel that in its way, this is an enhancement, not a loss. It is an expansion. And I'm very pleased by that. They're,
So people have
hmm,
said. So I've just got a question then. I think you
mhm.
want to put it out, and I guess that is so. Do you really think the DeSantis decision is going to be bad for pagans? I said it's going to be bad for
I,
women to begin with.
I think
Hmm.
it's bad for everyone.
Hmm.
Absolutely bad for pagans. Just DeSantis and his backing are extremely conservative Christian. I mean, that's the whole point. If you're not seeing that, you're not watching them. Of course, they don't like us. Um, they're more obviously opposed to the LGBTQ community. They're um, more obviously opposed to certain other communities, but we're not on their good list. And yes, I do think it's bad.
Hmm.
Now, how often is that going to happen? That's another question. But it just happens. It just needs to happen to you once for it to be bad.
Right, and that was what they were saying. I'm bad for everyone except cis white male. And, and it's bad for them too at the end
Hmm.
because who's going to serve them? It isn't just them as doctors anymore. I mean, it isn't like they're able to be self sufficient. No culture, and it's not about even color. There's no culture in America right now that it can be not dependent on the culture next to it or
Hmm.
independent, completely independent. No one is self sufficient, and not really at the levels that we want to be in being healthy.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of things going on politically at the moment are based
Hmm.
on the idea of not wanting to deal with people who are different from yourself.
Hmm.
If you belong to
Hmm.
white cis hetero men, but the thing is, at some point that may be turned around,
Hmm.
and it'll be a different situation then. But that's also not something I care to be necessarily sitting here in Florida for.
Right, and that's a really part of it. So
And then, of course, there's also being back among the family,
and yeah.
which I'm very much looking forward
And
to.
the other question is, do you think you can handle the snow or ice?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in it,
Yeah.
and
So let me.
I also still plan to travel.
So I will say one of the most important aspects of this is that if we don't get him his ID for June 11th, right, which will then put him into September for really qualifying for a lot of the medical services with a 90-day residency, right? Is that it pushes it deeper into the winter if he waits for longer and it takes longer to enter the program. And he could have actually weather conditions. Some of the weather could affect you, flu season and other things that could be dangerous because there is a they will not doubt him thing, but there is a little bit of a danger of moving states in the middle of a medical condition.
Hmm.
So we want to have as much cash as possible at the side. And so we've made the decision to sell this jewelry. We've made the decision to sell this art. There's a lot of art objects. You see the books moving,
Hmm.
and we're doing it very, very rapidly.
Yes.
But there's a lot of noise going out there. There's a lot of things that are happening out there, and people say things, gossips and even even harsher statements and things of that are felt to be true but unnecessary. All of those things always get mishmashed in these sort of crises. And let me not kid you, this is a crisis. For me, it's a crisis. Even if it doesn't seem to be you, it is for me.
Hmm.
I have to do all of these things and manage these things. And then I had to say the hardest thing that everyone didn't want to hear. I didn't want a U-Haul. The same way
Hmm.
that I want to move so quickly. As I said it, I had to put my foot down because all this is going to do is end up back in the darkness. And I wrote earlier today, this jewelry is tired of being in the darkness and it doesn't want to go back into the darkness. These
Hmm.
books now, Don, if you there's a picture somewhere around there of stacks of books that Don's keeping. Don't get me wrong, Don's is going to have a formidable library, but we've also been able to give books to people who wanted them. Father D, who's going to be on the shows later this week and this
Hmm.
month, he's going to start a new show, I think, called Black Magic, talking about the Black community and their magic in America and
Wonderful.
around the world. Yeah, isn't that going to be a great show?
Yeah.
But he got a Greek grammar book that he'd been looking for.
Yeah. He. I was talking earlier on midday with Reverend Don about that very thing. That I'm keeping a good bit of my Egyptian collection, but I'm also letting much of it go. And uh, when Father D was here, he was
Mhm.
interested in Gardiner's Egyptian grammar, which is a classic of Egyptian linguistics.
Mm.
And I was very happy to see it go to him because I know that he will appreciate it. Um, it's an old book. It's a fairly valuable book. Um, and I was glad to see him get it.
And I do find it fascinating. And we'll be putting up more books tomorrow. You find the books on Ed A. Hubbard, on my page personally,
Mm,
and you're going to see the jewelry on yours. That this is going to help save us as we do it quickly. We're going to need your help to do that as we move it quickly. Now, I have heard one thing. Let me go ahead, and I've heard it a little bit on my books, but I'm a little bit, I think, more fair on my books, a little higher cost because I know I have bookophiles. But a lot of people are saying you're selling the jewelry too cheap. I've heard this now again and again.
I've I've had people telling me that all evening.
And what?
So
So, can you explain why that you're comfortable with these prices? I know why you are. I can tell you why people are, but I want to know if you can say it.
well, I think for me, one of the primary reasons is that I would rather see it go to people who are going to appreciate it
Hmm.
and to members of our Corellian family and other people that we have known, people that I care about, and I don't want to throw up a huge barrier of making them so expensive that people can't do that.
So, and if you do see, if you're a Corellian priestess, a Corellian priest, you have one of the temples, and you see a piece, and you may not be able to afford it,
Mhm.
contact on right away. There is opportunities here. We want to spread this far
Absolutely.
and wide. Um, absolutely. There's people who are generous. People have been there. We can work things out. But yeah, so we still have a number. We haven't even opened up. So this is going to take us about 20 days, maybe a little longer. But all sales, we will be complete on this on May. Is it 31st this month or 30th? 31st. There will be the last day of any sales like this. Whatever we've
Mm.
sold will be sold. So watch this whole. It sounds like, oh yeah, that's a whole month away, but it will be continuous and that.
Yes.
And so yeah, and then it will be like somewhere before, maybe before May 31st, it'll all end. Hmm? And
Yes.
then all the packages will be sent out, and then we will be exiting Jacksonville with many, many tears and many much crying and maybe a party, right?
I
And
will certainly miss many people here.
and you have a chance to meet with Don for the next month. But let,
Yes.
but let's go ahead and finish this where we began. There is reasons for that's what we're doing. Not heartache, not pain, not despair, but real governmental problems, difficulties they make for us. And one of it is this idea of getting to be a resident
Mm,
and getting him back to Danville, if that's where he's going to live, is going to make a huge difference. Even if he made it on the June 12th, the day after his birthday, it won't be as impactful as if he gets there beforehand.
yes.
The weather is important. There's all sorts of, we've talked about kind of what some of the laws are saying. But if you ask why the decision was made, and why was it the idea of dissolving everything? We needed the money to move.
Hmm.
Spirit gave it to us. It gets us out into the temples. And we still need a considerable way to go. We're about maybe 10% into what we need, but that's great for the first day. Hmm?
Absolutely.
So
You know, I
good.
was saying earlier on Midday with Reverend Don that, in a manner of speaking, I mean, selling my mother's jewelry is also really, really, in a manner of speaking, her last gift to me to help me restart my life.
Hmm.
I'm grateful that I've got it. Um, and I'm grateful to see it going to people that I care about and who will care about it. And, you know, if the prices might be a little low, that's better than seeing it go to people who won't care about it,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
So the higher the price, the more you're attracting the collectors.
Hmm.
And there are
Now,
some pieces. Go
some of
ahead.
these pieces are collector's pieces, but some of them have higher prices than others too. So,
And and yeah, and same with the books.
mhm. And I'm not letting go of every single piece. I'm keeping some that have more emotional value, some that have, well, you know, this necklace I'm wearing was my grandmother's. It's not going to
Mhm.
be part of the sale. It, it's going to remain part of my personal collection, but most things are going.
So I'm going to talk about the last thing, right?
Hmm.
Well, here we go. What is they saying? Oh yeah, we were talking about that earlier. That's the truth. Okay, yeah. So I think one of the things I saw was that you have actually had men ask for questions. It's not all women's jewelry. Um,
Um, no, there may be a few men's pieces, and also some of them, in my opinion,
hmm
um, while maybe intended for women, are suitable for men. But then you see, I love my lapel pins,
hmm
um, and some of those clip-on earrings make excellent lapel pins.
hmm
Earlier today, there was an inquiry. I had mentioned one of my tie tacks, and there was an inquiry about that. So yeah, some of there may be some men's jewelry come into this.
Right. So there you go, folks. That so you've heard it now. The reason we're doing it is to establish residency in Illinois to make sure that Don has a continuous flow of medical treatment available to him, and moving from what is now obviously a state where it's going to be hot and sticky, which is going to suppress his ability to walk and do some other exercise. And also, and Illinois does have lovely summers, and no, I'm just making that up. They have
Well,
all sorts.
Illinois has its hot days too, but there aren't nearly as many.
There isn't nearly as many, and then also the idea of that establishment and getting in sort of thing. And that John will be moving. We're going to be smaller apartments, smaller things. So we're going to do all of this out there. Is Don going to take important pieces and assets with him? Is he going to be able to reestablish a real ancestral altar back in Danville? We'll talk about more of that in the days to come. We'll talk about the adventures of Don as we begin this process. Live. Here we are, the Truman Show, except this is now Reverend Don Show. Midday with Reverend Don, Daily Spells with Reverend Don, Patreon with Don.
Yeah.
Again, join his Patreon. But today, to understand, so you've heard it right from the horse's mouth. The reason we have to do this, let me get this very, very clear. There is no other reason to not to do this. And I'm sorry I had to be so severe about it, but Don's got to go get a legal idea, and he can't play games at this, which means he needs an apartment, and he needs to actually be in the state in the motor vehicle line on his 60th birthday, like so many Americans do.
Yes,
Right? And so,
absolutely.
in so I just want you to share that idea. And there are other reasons. We can give you a thousand of other reasons of where the state's going and everything else. Don's getting exceptional care here in Florida, and
That's true.
and we're reluctant to leave that. But in the long run, we need to be back in Illinois. So you heard it from the horse's mouth, and why we're selling. And even though it's bittersweet, it actually does have a real value to us, and it
Hmm.
is really is a community growth thing. So the last thing I want to say this, and this is to all the other elders. Now people have asked me, how would I handle my own crisis? Well, here we are. We're handling our own crisis.
Hmm.
And I've told people before there's a lot of value in the libraries and the altars and the temples. It may be ego, but letting it go might be the best thing you can to save your eldership and have a little bit of cash. We
Well,
can find.
that's the thing,
Mhm.
because I'm certainly in the last part of my life at this point, and am I going to be the servant of all this stuff, or is it going to serve me and
Mhm.
my life? And in this way, it can also serve many other people.
Thank you, guys. I think we all feel a little better.
Thank you, Jim.
And I think it was shocking. I can understand what we did and how we had to say it was shocking. All this is very tender emotions right now. We need to be gentle with each other, and we need to really be gentle with each other because there's a lot of emotions running around right now.
Hmm.
New events, new things, and of course, heading to the parliament is no lack of positive energy.
That's
Uh,
true.
yeah. And she goes, many of the places would look lovely on our ancestor. Yes.
Actually, the necklace that I'm wearing has been on an ancestor altar for many years,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm wearing it specifically to have that energy around me. So yes, I mean, putting a piece of ancestral jewelry on on an ancestor altar is a very practical thing to do. And
Mm-hmm.
if you then choose to wear it, you're keeping their energy around you.
Mm-hmm. And so there you go. And one last thing, there you go, beautiful. There you go. Lori's been such a supporter and
Yes,
continuing
indeed.
to be supportive. And she's offered major amount of help for us in this upcoming move. So we'll be talking more about that. We're going to give you pretty much be transparent from here on out. We understand there's so many statements and rumors and things that go around, just the way the community of
Hmm.
people are. That we're going to keep you. Please keep us in these things. So I want to make sure that because I wanted to clear up this message so that everybody understood how it is. And I can be. I got to remember to be a little less jarring. But yeah, so if anyone asks you who made this decision, well, Don and I made the decision, but
Mm.
I am the one who said this is a must, and I'm the one who's bringing it up to the community that this is a must thing to do. And And the cruel thing is selling. Well, Don has been very agreeable, and he is very patient on that, and he's agreed to it. His spirit has really encouraged him as such.
Hmm.
But it's still my job to get it out the door and make a value for it so we can get there. And at the end of the day, we want to move to Don to Danville at June by June 11th, so he can get his new ID and his new apartment and begin this sort of next creative and more private life. And yeah, and still be doing all this because Don is not going to stop talking to you and will be very much more transparent. So,
This is
Don,
true.
do us a favor as we do at any of the shows when you're here. Would you give us a prayer?
Certainly. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we ask you to be with us and guide us as we go forward. We know that we stand together in the circle of the great family, the living and the spirits, hand in hand, and we ask you to help us to remain mindful of this. For living in the physical world sometimes obscures our vision. Help us to keep clear eyes and help us to hear your words as we go forward. Beloved ones, we thank you with great love and with respect. And may you blessed be now and always. And may you blessed be now and always as well. And we'll see you next time.